Welcome to the DUBCAST with Dubside. This is DUBCAST number 62, a continuation of what was covered in number 61. So we'll have to title this How to Paddle Really, Really, Really Fast, Part 2. And I'll do some music that I did first back in DUBCAST number 12 by a band called Zikaza. I wrote an article for Sea Kayaker Magazine that was published in April of 2013. And Sea Kayaker Magazine has been out of business for a long time. I don't know that you can find back issues anywhere or archives, but I will read the article for you. And just to set up the preliminaries here, there's a guy in the 1930s takes a big, long, dramatic kayak trip. It'll describe the circumstances. And then his grandson in 1997 does a reenactment of the race, holds an event to commemorate that. And he does it again in 1998. And then in the year 2012, he tries again to revive this race commemoration thing. And in 97 and 98, the top paddlers in Greenland were Maligiak Padilla. We know he was just coming up at that point. And the other two older guys, there was a guy named Arne Nielsen and a Danish guy named Mikael Jakobsen. So they feature prominently in this story. And there's one other racer who wasn't quite as fast as those three, but his name was Apollo Zeeb. And then the guy who organized the race, who's the grandson, his name is Kunak, and there's other people in there. But that's the basic idea of the framework of the story. Article is entitled Paartok 2012. A 2-day race along Greenland's coastline. Less than a minute off the starting line, it seems Maligiak Padilla has finally met his match. Despite the 8 Greenland National Kayaking Champion titles to his name and widespread acknowledgement as the best traditional paddler in the world, he is slipping, inch by inch, behind Mikael Jakobsen. The two of them are leading the pack of kayakers embarking on a 2-day, 68-mile race along the southwestern coast of Greenland. It is an uncharacteristically sunny July morning in the normally foggy town of Paartok as a crowd of spectators gathers just after 9 a.m. on the town's main harbor dock. A flotilla of about a dozen chase boats swerves into position as the cluster of racers merge into a single-file formation. They veer to the left on the route out of the harbor, passing the first iceberg in what promises to be a long but scenic day. The steep, rugged hills, covered in rocks, moss, and ice, plunge into twisting fjords. In the crisp Arctic air, the scale of the land is imposing. Narsarsuaq, the day's destination, is a teeny settlement that used to serve as a collection point for the regional fish catch. In the 1930s, according to local folklore, a young Narsarsuaq boy suffered an accidental gunshot wound. The closest medical assistance was in Paartok, 34 miles to the north. There was no radio link and no working motorboat available in Narsarsuaq. The task of summoning help fell to Peter H. Lorentz, a kayaker familiar with the prevailing wind, current, and fog patterns in the area's maze of fjords. He set out on an urgent and successful race against time to get word to Paartok. Over half a century later, in 1997, Peter's grandson, Kunak Lorentz, organized a commemorative 2-day race from Paartok to Narsarsuaq and back. The event was named Paartok, the Greenlandic word for messenger. In the debut race, Mikael Jakobsen, then 28, took first place, holding a steady lead over the second-place finisher, an older Greenlander. A 15-year-old kid also competed, but was never a serious threat. The kid's name was Maligiak Padilla. The following year, Maligiak won the Greenland National Championship, surprising all the adults, especially Arne Nielsen, who had won the title the year before and had been expecting to win again. A short time later, Maligiak surprised Mikael by winning the 1998 Paartok race, too. For a few years, Mikael, Maligiak, and Arne became the top three racers at the championships and often split the results, one winning the short-distance race, one winning the long-distance race, and one winning the portage race. Kunak did not hold the Paartok race in 1999, and both Arne and Mikael were soon busy with other pursuits, so these three have had no chance to test their skills against one another for 14 years. Reviving the race and honoring his grandfather's legacy has been on Kunak's mind for some time. The ideal opportunity presented itself when Paamut was selected for the 2012 National Championship site. With the help of his daughter Helga and another Paamut resident named Johan Rosing, Kunak secured all the necessary sponsors to complete the arrangements. In the future, he hopes to gain enough momentum to create an annual event with bigger sponsors and a larger prize purse, attracting more participants. The Paartok 2012 race is organized and run independent of the Greenland National Kayaking Championships, which ended the previous day in Paamut. Unlike the national competition, Paartok 2012 offers cash prizes. The first place winner will go home 20,000 Danish kroners richer. Besides the skin-on-frame division Maligiak and Mikael are competing in, there's also a plastic/fiberglass category, and the organizers have added a prize for the fastest woman. The water is ice cold, but the air temperature is in the 60s, though it feels cooler when a cloud passes or the breeze picks up. Most of the racers are only wearing synthetic shirts or lightweight paddling jackets. As Maligiak and Mikael pull farther ahead of the pack, Mikael's Aleutian craft is going faster than Maligiak's Greenland kayak. There are subtle differences in the paddling technique of these two closely matched racers. Although they both have Greenland-style paddles, Maligiak uses a wide grip on his and has little visible torso rotation, appearing to use his arms more. Mikael twists from the waist. The larger paddle blades on his paddle give him a slower cadence. In the past few years, Maligiak has lived outside Greenland. For this race, he had to pay his way from his current residence in Alaska, and he's counting on using the prize money to defray his travel costs. That would be an overreaching assumption for most contenders, but given Maligiak's formidable record, it's a reasonable proposition. Still, even his supreme athletic abilities can't be taken for granted. About 5 months before the race, Maligiak began a rigorous training routine that he has developed over the past 15 years. With Maligiak on his tail and a clear expanse of sparkling blue water in front of him, Danish paddler Mikael Jakobsen, age 43, is doing well with the Aleutian-style kayak he built for the race. His experience with traditional kayaking goes back to the 1990s, and a recent fascination with Aleutian culture led him to research and experiment with badarkas, or ikiaks, as Mikael prefers to call them out of respect for the people who first created them. In Paartok 2012, his multi-chine kayak frame with a bifurcated bow qualifies as a traditional kayak, though its origins are far from Greenland. Mikhail has an Aleutian-inspired adjustable rudder controlled by lines running to the cockpit. The Aleutians made rudder adjustments by tugging the lines with their hands, but Mikhail has a foot-controlled scheme similar to modern kayak rudders. Trailing the leaders by a steadily widening gap is Arne Nielsen, age 48. He wasn't able to find a suitable substitute for the skin-on-frame kayak he sold some time ago, so he has entered in the plastic fiberglass category. While any of several brands of high-performance racing kayaks would likely give Mikhail and Maligak skin-on-frames a run for their money, all the entrants in the non-skin-on-frame division are borrowing one of the bright yellow-orange plastic kayaks that Jacob Thorsen, a Paartok resident, rents to tourists. They are identical, wide, stable, utilitarian boats, but at just 13.5 feet long, they're no one's idea of a racing kayak. Jakob, using one of his own kayaks, is participating in the race at the age of 70. Arne is slightly taller than Mikhail and Maligak and somewhat heavier, but just as muscular. In the plastic kayak, he steadily drops further behind the two narrower, longer kayaks in the lead. The Paartok race route veers east, away from the mainland, for a few miles of open water to cross the first fjord. With Paartok hidden behind the horizon, the surroundings look just as Peter Lorentzen saw them some 80 years ago. As the first hour passes, Maligak is still trailing Mikhail, but it's not likely that he's worried. Mikhail's sleek Ikiak may be faster in a sprint, but Maligak thrives on portages. There are 5 portages in Paartok, and the racers must hoist their kayaks onto their shoulders and run head in cockpit for as far as 200 or 300 yards to the next stretch of water. Maligak has been known to outpace the photographers trying to keep up with him. He figures that whatever Mikhail gains on the water can be taken back on land with a little extra to win. The organizers stay busy throughout the 2-day race, marking the portage routes and staffing them with helpers to supply participants with drinks and snacks. The route is long enough that even when the racers are spread out, hours apart, not all portages will need to be operated simultaneously. A few roving crews leapfrog each other to cover the course and use VHF marine radios to update everyone on racer locations. The first portage is marked with a Greenland flag and bisects a long island that crosses the race route. On land, the racers will be plagued by mosquitoes. Even when the insects aren't biting, they invade ears, eyes, and nose. Racers with a bit of foresight bring head nets or bug dope. Mikhail arrives at the first portage only slightly ahead of Maligak. He climbs out of the Ikiak with one arm cramping and a troubling sensation weakness in his leg. He limps along as best he can while Maligak darts up the hill like a cat over a sofa to take the lead. By the time Mikhail reaches the put-in, Maligak is well into the fjord. In 1998, Maligak did the same thing on the first portage. Further back in the line of kayaks and chase boats, Marie Christine Samuelson is ahead of the only other woman in the race. Just 2 days ago, Marie, at 33 and with more than 10 years of involvement in the national championships, outscored the other female competitors to capture the women's title. Harpoon throwing, rope gymnastics, and rolling skills all came into play, but today and tomorrow, her paddling ability will be tested at more than 5 times the distance of the longest national championship race. Marie, like many of the other racers, hasn't really trained for a race of this length. For some, the finish line won't arrive before grit and determination run out. Marie lives in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, but originally hailed from Paartok. She was a key player in the Paartok Kayak Club for many years and still feels very much a part of the local team. For this race, she has her familiar skin-on-frame and a contingent of old friends cheering her on. By the second portage, Maligyak is well out in front. Mikael Jakobsen has been overtaken by Apollo Zeeb. The radio chatter spreads the news of the changing lineup. Zeeb, a 45-year-old Greenlander from Karsut, has become a standout at the championship races, turning in winning times in those years when Maligyak was not competing. Apollo is even shorter and smaller than Maligyak, but just as lean, a surprisingly powerful and compact paddling engine. Going into this race, he had no illusions about beating Maligyak, but seizing second place brings on newfound reserves of energy, and he digs in a little bit harder. The route takes a 90-degree turn to the south and follows the edge of an island with a 2,000-foot peak rising steeply from the water's edge. The second portage crosses a small promontory that juts into the fjord. Mikael slips back to third place and slogs along using the same paddle he has raced with for years. It was once covered with bright yellow paint, but more than half has worn down to bare wood. Ahead of him, Apollo surges forward with his short, choppy stroke, holding the paddle quite low and with a lot of rapid arm movement. He has wider blades and he doesn't appear to be twisting from the waist at all. Mikael hasn't been able to shake off the cramps and dizziness that started back at the first portage. Something is wrong, and now he has to decide if he should push on through the warning signs or call it quits. The doubt itself is taxing his speed, and the fact that the two-day race is barely underway is especially troubling. Pulling further into the lead with every passing minute, Maligyak has to squint a bit more each time he turns around to see who's behind him. Paddling confidently and efficiently with rhythmic precision, he's in a very familiar situation, locked into his forward stroke groove, far out ahead of the pack. There have been less triumphant moments in his paddling career. In 2005, the demands of his job and disagreements among the members of the kayak club in his hometown of Sisimiut led him to shock the kayak community by not attending the championships that year. Rumors circulated that he was abandoning the sport for other athletic pursuits, until he showed up in 2006 prepared to dominate the field as he had done 6 times already. Then, in an unfortunate motorboat mishap just one day before the competition, he suffered serious injuries requiring hospitalization and had to sit out the entire event. A year later, his back still hadn't fully recovered. By 2008, he had regained his top form and staged a dramatic comeback, ending a 4-year hiatus. Neither Mikael Jakobsen nor Arne Nielsen was active at this time, and no one of their caliber had stepped forward to fill the void, leaving Maligyak uncontested as the fastest traditional paddler. He took first place in every race by a wide margin, blazing off the starting line too fast for everyone to take advantage of his wake. On the last leg of the relay race, he had such a huge lead that he slowed down and came around the final turn paddling backward at so casual a pace that most of the spectators assumed that he was somebody else who wasn't in the race. More recently, championship officials have questioned his eligibility to compete as a Greenlander and vie for the title because he no longer lives in Greenland. This has the outward appearance of a ruse to keep him from making off with the lion's share of the gold medals. Maligyak has tried to contest the issue, pointing out that he still has Greenlandic citizenship, yet for the past 2 years he has graciously accepted the final ruling and contented himself with judging and mentoring duties at the championships. Kunak and his crew of organizers have arranged for a motorboat to follow each racer. Most are cabinless undecked vessels with 40 to 90 horsepower outboards, showing plenty of wear and tear from the hard use at the hands of the fishermen who own them. There are 2 much newer-looking police Zodiacs and a larger rescue ship with full medical facilities on board for emergencies. Kayaking safely in remote areas like this normally requires an abundance of safety gear, but for the structure of the well-organized race allows the participants to forego paddle floats, pumps, spare paddles, flares, radios, compasses, and tow belts. They do each have a laminated chart of the race route, which provides only a rough gauge since it lacks any compass markings or scale. If fatigue, big waves, or cold water become too much to take, bowing out of the competition is simply a matter of hailing the chase boat. A reliable role is not a prerequisite for entering the race, so the chase crews are also prepared for rescues if anyone capsizes. Both Maligiak and Apollo have negotiated the second portage by the time Mikhail gets there. His condition has worsened into a persistent dizziness. As he pulls his spray skirt off the coaming and tries to step ashore, he loses his balance and plunges into waist-deep water. All his instincts are telling him he doesn't belong in a kayak today, but with thousands of dollars and his reputation on the line, he can't bring himself to give up just yet. After scrambling onto dry land and pausing long enough to catch his breath and refocus, he trudges up the hill, down the other side, and gets back on the water. Behind him, in fourth place, and also holding the first place slot for the plastic fiberglass category, Arne comes to the second portage. The organizers have decided that racers using heavy plastic kayaks can get help carrying them. Arne is happy to accept the assistance and grabs one end while a portage staffer takes the other, leaving each of them a free hand to swat mosquitoes. Jacob Thorson, using one of the paddles he normally rents with the kayaks, holds second place among the plastic kayaks. His Euroblade paddle is a rather cheap one with large plastic blades. The racers behind him are infuriated to see a 70-year-old man in a plastic tub with a spoon-shaped paddle effortlessly staying ahead of them. In his day, Jacob actually had a long history of involvement with the championships and was one of the fastest traditional paddlers years before Maligiak became a force to be reckoned with. Why he is using a Euro paddle now is a mystery to the other racers, but it's working well for him. The third portage is designated Inuit on the chart, and it marks the midpoint of the course. Greenland's southwest coastline boasts mile after mile of rocky hillsides. While the population per square mile would appear to be close to zero, evidence of isolated human habitation pops up here and there. If the terrain provides an easy landing, a relatively flat field, a stream with fish, and a nice view, chances are someone else noticed the same thing 10, 100, or 1,000 years earlier and gave the place a name. Inuit in its entirety consists of a lone cabin set into a grassy slope. The breeze is blowing strong enough to keep the mosquitoes at bay. Maligiak arrives shortly after the staging crew has set up shop. He again zips through the drill at a fireman's pace, and in short order he's paddling into the distance. Apollo Zeeb arrives next and negotiates the halfway checkpoint without trouble. Less than half a mile behind him, Mikhail is struggling to keep on, but continual cramps and dizziness force him to pull up next to his chase boat and lean against it to try to regain his equilibrium. When he comes to land, Mikhail needs assistance to get out of the ikiak. Food, drink, and lying down on the grass do nothing to improve his condition. Well aware that the remainder of the race has exposed sections of open water and that his sense of balance is all but gone, he knows he must do what he's been dreading. He notifies the portage crew that he is out of the race. Taken aboard the rescue ship, Mikhail is examined by 2 nurses on duty who are unable to shed any light on the cause of his condition. He takes a shower and rests. Far in the lead, Maligiak emerges from the more sheltered passages as rocky, twisting shorelines on his right give way to a clear view of the choppy waters of Davis Strait. He has to pay attention to the waves rather than watch for whales or other wildlife. Local polar bear sightings are quite rare, but a few were seen around Paartok the previous week. Icebergs that have calved off a glacier several miles up the adjoining fjord dominate the last open crossing. They drift slowly across the horizon, some crusted in tinges of gray and brown, an indication that they have lasted through the previous winter. Others, recently flipped over, are shades of aquamarine blue. Every so often, an explosive crunch echoes across the water as an iceberg breaks apart and rolls. By mid-afternoon, Muligak has more than a half-mile lead on Apollo and upwards of half an hour on almost everyone else. His intense regime of cardiovascular training over the past many months has paid off. Rounding the last bend, he enters the channel that leads to Narsarsuaq. The village's less than 50 summer inhabitants have been notified by radio that the first kayak is coming. They come out to sit on a high promontory or stand along the edge of the small dock, cheering and waving. Muligak covers the 34 miles in 6 hours and 2 minutes. Apollo arrives 8 minutes later. Over the next 4 hours, the other participants come in. Arne Nielsen third, Jacob Thornton fourth, and Marie Samuelson toward the end. The only other woman competing has, like Mikael, dropped out, which means all Marie has to do tomorrow is complete the race to earn a share of the prize money. Everyone joins forces to carry the kayaks up the steep shoreline, secure gear, and commiserate on the effects of 34 miles of exertion. Bags, packs, and cases are emptied out of the chase boats, and the racers sort through their belongings, picking out dry clothes. Narsarsuaq was closed by the government in the 1960s and is now used primarily as a summer getaway. A few small houses have been made available to the visiting racers and support personnel, presenting a cozy selection of couches, beds, and floor pads in various nooks and lofts. There's no running water, so showers will have to wait. After an hour of settling in, dinner is served in the back half of Narsarsuaq's lone-weathered church. The food offered is heavy on meat: seal, caribou, and lamb. There's also fresh Arctic char along with a big pot of boiled potatoes. Afterward, there's time to tarry outside and chat with locals. Paartok lies well south of the Arctic Circle, so there will be a few hours of darkness between midnight and 2 or 3 a.m., but after paddling 34 miles in one day, none of the racers will be awake to notice. The foggy haze that hangs over Narsarsuaq's sky the next morning clears by 9 a.m. when the kayaks are lined up adjacent to the dock on the starting line and the chase boats are loaded. Mikael Jakobsen will ride back and lend assistance at the portages instead of paddling. Onlookers crowd the bank as the race begins. Muligak immediately shoots into the lead ahead of Arne and Apollo. After the first portage, Muligak is so far ahead of Apollo that he can only see Apollo's chase boat. Apollo presents no real challenge at this point. Even if he were to creep up closer, Muligak still has yesterday's time advantage, so technically all he has to do to win is avoid falling more than 8 minutes behind Apollo. He eases off just a bit by walking the second portage instead of taking it at a run. At the fourth portage, Muligak can no longer see a trace of anything behind him. Greenland's reigning champion has another race sewn up. By mid-afternoon, most of the racers are clearly exhausted. A large bank of fog covers the last open crossing. Halfway across, what seems to be a welcome landmass is just visible through the haze, but it turns out to be a mammoth iceberg. The actual destination shoreline is another mile or two of weary paddling. Muligak crosses the finish line after 4 p.m., well ahead of Apollo. The order of racers hasn't changed for several hours, as monitored by VHF radio communication, so Paartok knows well in advance what to expect at the finish line. During the long wait between finishers, chase boats congregate near the final turn leading into the harbor. Each passing kayak gets a hunting rifle salute. The shots echo wildly across the water. By about 7 p.m., the last kayak arrives to the cheers of the crowd. An awards dinner takes place the following evening after the racers have had time to rest and recover. The banquet includes speeches, singing, a spread of delectable Greenlandic food, and the presentation of prizes. Each participant receives a kayak Paartok pennant, a kayak Paartok club pin, and a framed certificate signed by Kunak Lorentzen, his daughter Helga, and Johan Rosing. Mikael has recovered, but is still baffled as to the cause of his difficulties. Good sportsman that he is, he congratulates all the winners. Maligiak gets the top cash prize of about $4,000 US. With flight costs from Anchorage to Paartok and back, he has only broken even, which is okay with him. Apollo gets the second prize payout, equivalent to roughly $2,800. A teenager named Jens Thomassen, one of Apollo's protégés, who had no expectation of winning anything, takes the third place prize. Arne takes the plastic category prize, and Marie receives the woman's prize, each about $1,700. Although the national championships will probably not be held in Paartok for a while, Kunak intends to hold the Paartok race next year. Maligiak has every intention of participating and would like to shave his best time down to under 6 hours. Arne plans to use a skin-on frame that year. Apollo will see if his schedule allows a repeat appearance. Marie is considering it, and Mikael intends to practice portaging and come earlier to better acclimate. How would the top paddlers in the Paartok race compare to the hunters from generations ago who made their livelihood in the cockpit of a kayak? Greenland skin-on frames are still made largely in the traditional style, yet modern tools, materials, and physical training techniques have pushed the state of the art in many ways. Maligiak is arguably the fastest traditional paddler of his generation, making him a reasonable measure of modern paddling ability. No one knows for sure what route Peter Lorentzen took to get to Paartok in the 1930s. A look at the map indicates not much difference between the 5 portage race course and other paths that follow water the entire distance. We don't know the wind and wave conditions on the day of the original incident. Yet the question remains, how good were the best kayakers nearly 100 years ago? If all the details of Peter Lorentzen's heroic feat are true and have survived intact in the telling and retelling, he reportedly made the 34-mile trip to Paartok in under 3 hours. And again, that is an article I wrote for Sea Kayaker Magazine that was published in the April 2013 issue. And to follow up on some of that, the guy, Kunak, wanted to hold that as a regular race, try to build up a big event. The next year, they had scheduled it, and I went to Paartok the next year after the Greenland competition. But there were not enough people signed up, so they didn't hold it, and I don't think that idea was able to continue, and he has not held the race again. And after the text of the article, it says, Dubside began kayaking in 1998, has been to the Greenland National Championships regularly starting in 2004, and has served as a competition judge for the last 3 years. He participated in the Paartok 2012 race using one of the plastic kayaks and finished 6th overall. His best time was on the first day at 8 hours and 35 minutes. Now, before we start calculating numbers and add up the data, let me give you what I couldn't find last time, but since has turned up. I have a printout from a Greenland technical forum on the Kayak USA website. And I think this has long since been erased or not available on the site, but this is from 2002. And this was posted by Greg Stamer under the topic of Paartok. And it says, there is at least one Greenland paddling method esteemed there for high speeds where you deliberately lift water upwards very late in the stroke. with the blade recovered by quickly flicking it out of the water by rolling the wrist of the pulling hand forward. The stroke is started with a very vertical paddle and with a fast cadence. Once speed is achieved, the paddle angle can become less vertical. Akaluk Hilman from Upernavik informed me that this method is still used in his village and that it is performed there using a sliding stroke. He claimed that when done properly, the bow will lower during the stroke and that paddling effort will decrease. I have been shown virtually the same technique on land in several parts of Greenland by different kayakers, but have not seen this performed on the water. All sources agree that it takes tremendous strength. Maligiak cannot perform this stroke, but is aware of it and claims that John Peterson can perform it. Many Greenlanders talk of this technique being used in past times. Now this is from 2002, so Maligiak there is talking about John Peterson from Nuuk, the earlier John Peterson, who hasn't been active in a long time, not the John Peterson from Ilulissat we're familiar with today. So the next paragraph, Greg says, John Heath sent me some additional information for public dissemination that I posted on the list. So it's the what I read before that it wasn't published at this time, but it has since been published in the thing from H.C. Peterson, as he's talking about there. And then he goes on after that. He says, Peterson's description differs from what Akaluk Hilman described to me. I asked Akaluk if the paddle thrust at the end of the stroke is directed at or under the stern, and he said that it was not, that it was simply directed upward. John Heath noted that, according to H.C. Peterson, there are documented stories of paddlers who maintained a 7.1 mile per hour pace over 12 hours using this stroke. John also noted that there are undocumented accounts of paddlers traveling at speeds much faster than this rate. I think he's referring to there about the Ezekias Davidson story that we've heard before. The other one, the 7.1 mile per hour, I'll get to that in a minute. But to finish Greg's article here, it says, as you can imagine, this stroke has created controversy outside of Greenland. I have played with the stroke and have achieved some very fast short-term speeds, as you would expect from a vertical paddle and fast cadence, but am yet unsure if I can detect any change in the bow attitude. I am skeptical of Peterson's explanation that accelerated water from the paddle pushes the stern upwards, but perhaps other forces are at work. Finally, if Maligiak is not strong enough to perform it, who does 800 push-ups a day, then my chances seem very limited indeed. And he signs his name Greg Stamer. All right, now to get everything we possibly have here. In the H.C. Peterson article, which appears in John Heath's book as well as in the Kayak Journal, Volume 2, before the paragraph on Kushashuni Paartok, there's a little piece about some fast kayaking going on. But since they didn't use that stroke, I didn't include it from before. But just to complete the full record here, it says, kayakers able to paddle at high speeds have always been remembered and mentioned with respect. The speed of a kayak is naturally determined by several factors: the paddler's strength, his technique, and the kayak's construction and shape. Many reports mention kayak trips, long-distance paddling, and paddling speeds, but it is not possible to calculate speeds on the basis of these accounts. One day I heard on Radio Greenland, this is H.C. Peterson talking, one day I heard on Radio Greenland a kayaker tell about his kayak trip from Iluglik to Frederiksdal, a distance of 185 kilometers. He had departed early in the morning and reached his destination sometime in the evening. That's one story there. Then he says, my grandfather once paddled on open waters from Kangamiut to Sisimiut, a stretch of 136 kilometers. He started at 6 a.m., and the colony clock struck 6 p.m. on his arrival in the evening, making his average speed for the trip 11 kilometers per hour, which is 7.1 miles per hour, and that's what John Heath refers to when he mentions this story. Now, I've met Akaluk Hilman, and he was there in 2004, the first year I was there. And he came back a few times around 2013 or so. Now, he and one or two other people were the only guys from Upernavik who would come to the competition. So if talking about in his village, people use that stroke. In 2002, that was reported, might be from a few years before that. So probably those people are no longer alive. But I'm not aware that any of them had been to the competition, at least in the years that I've gone after, in the 2000s. Okay, let's make a list from slowest to fastest from all these stories we have. Starting on the bottom, the Paartok race at 34 miles, which is 54 kilometers. My best time was 8.5 hours, which comes out to 6.3 kilometers per hour. Then we have Maligiak. His best time was 6 hours. That comes out to about 9 kilometers per hour. Then we had Brian Blankenship talking about when he's really trained fully. He's making about 11 kilometers per hour. Then we have the H.C. Peterson story of the guy from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening. That's 11.4 kilometers per hour. The story of the guy paddling in the morning and come back in the evening, there's not enough definite time period of when morning and evening is, so we can't really get any data over that. Then we have single Olympic kayaks, top speed, about 17 plus, close to 18 kilometers per hour. And this is racing for a distance of 1 kilometer. Then we have from the 1930s, Peter Lorentzen getting an emergency message for medical help, doing 54 kilometers in under 3 hours, he says. That would be better than 18 kilometers per hour. And this is for the space of 54 kilometers, so maintaining it for quite some time. Above that, we have a 4-man Olympic kayak, top speed of 20 kilometers per hour. Above that, we have the 8-man rowing shell, top speed 22.5 kilometers per hour. Above that, we have reportedly Ezekias Davidson in the Noordelijk doing somewhere 27, 28 kilometers per hour. And then we have the human-powered watercraft world record in a hydrofoil of 34 kilometers per hour. Well, for the entries that are not in modern times, let's examine what we can of the historical record. For Ezekias Davidson, going to the store in less than an hour to get cigarettes, the map I have indicates that Nanortalik is about 27 to 28 kilometers from Tasiusaq, but there's Nanortalik proper and there's Nanortalik district, and it can't tell if the store he was going to was farther outside of town in the direction of where he was at. And then in Tasiusaq, he could have been living somewhat down the fjord a ways. So we could maybe take off a couple kilometers, but still from 27 down to 22 kilometers, that still beats Olympic single kayaks. Well, even if we dismiss this story as too outrageous to believe, we are left with the trip from Narsalik to Paamiut, 54 kilometers, by Peter Lorentzen in the 30s. Having paddled it myself, I know what's involved here. So the town of Narsalik is very small. It's not even a town. And gathering the information that there was an injury and that there was no motorboat available, et cetera, that would all have to be done in the center there. So you can't have somebody living far away to suddenly go out. It's got to start from Narsarsuaq proper. And then when you get to Paamiut, there's a final turn through the fjord, and you come into an inlet, and Paamiut is sort of at the end of that. So that somewhat discredits the idea that a much shorter distance was actually paddled. Possible scenario of him getting close to Paamiut and finding a fisherman or somebody out on the water in a motorboat. And the last however many kilometers, the word is taken that way, and so Peter Lorentzen doesn't do the entire distance. And the other skin-on-frame accounts, which are talking about roughly 11 kilometers per hour, that's the equivalent of a wing paddle in the hands of someone who's not an Olympic athlete. Well, based on all that we have here and trying to take a view of things with a realistic perspective, it's hard to imagine a skin-on-frame kayak beating an 8-man rowing shell. So let's put that aside. We still have at least one account of someone at Olympic-level speeds maintaining that for hours. What would happen if you took that technique, which only works on flat water, and did it in a sprint for a distance of 1 kilometer, like they do in the Olympics, which is only done on flat water? What would happen? Well, I'd certainly like to see somebody pursue this. Maybe somebody from Galashisut Nunat, or maybe from somewhere else. And what Greg Stamer said about Kusashasluni Paartok, we'll have to bear in mind. He said, all sources agree that it takes tremendous strength.
Nasa tanlipa ang galero na sohona Inatuara na puhume Inuit atasuta sa pangina lameri pununa Kisema sila na puhume Nasata aku tasuk piuman ang ginepapo Uanga suhat pinastugu Nipihan iseri aku tisa putayo Beriyu tisaka kushluta Titanlipa atapinero ne sohona Mangetile ne puhume Sususita hima Namangina lemeri pununa Anetusane surami Balita Pijumasasu Isingina leme papu Agine Suha Pinashtugu Nipiha Iseri Aku tisa putayo Beriyu Tisaka Kushluta Piumasasu isingina lena papu Uanga suhat pinashtugu Nipiha iseri aku tisa putayo Deriyu tisaka kushluta
That song is called Nunaswata Nipa, or The Voice of a Country. Originally recorded by a group called Zikaza in 1990. And I believe that is out of print. So may be difficult to come by. But if you can't get a hold of it, you have my version. I did it once before in DUBCAST number 12, and this is the updated version. On the liner notes, it says, Nipitumik. So in the title of that song, Nipa, the second word refers to the voice, but nipi could be the sound of things. So when you say nipitumik, that would be with sound, or the two meaning a lot of sound. So they're translating that as play very loud. But you're welcome to play my version at whatever volume you please. Well, I'm not sure what episode 63 is going to be, because I'm making this in a batch of 6 episodes I'm sending to Andrew. So I'll have enough in the can, so to speak, that when I'm traveling through the summer in Greenland and Denmark and Sweden and to Michigan and Minnesota, I've got enough episodes that we can keep them coming while I'm gone. And while I'm gone, I'm going to be doing interviews to bring them to you when I get back. And in Greenland, one of my questions to ask people is, can you tell me anything about Kusasashtuni Palnak? Can you show me what it looks like?